we need to talk about our forests. It's about whether we should clear and burn them to create so-called green energy. Now that is very controversial. When looking at European Union climate policy, it's very important to look at the small print. For example, investing in nuclear is officially green investment. Investing in gas, a fossil fuel, is officially a green investment. And the small print in the renewable policy too. Did you know that 60% of European Union renewable energy comes from biomass, and very often that means burning wood pellets to create electricity? My name's Chris Cummins, this is FM4's Klima News Weekly. Today it's all about biomass.
FM4 Klima News.
Let's have a contest. In the blue corner we have Kjell, he's from the Biomass Industry. We'll talk to him later. And in the red corner we have some activists who gathered recently outside the European Parliament in Brussels to protest against EU subsidies for biomass. Among the protesters was Luke Chamberlain.
Burning forests for so-called renewable energy is bad for the climate, it's bad for biodiversity, and it's bad for human health. It is a fraudulent energy policy that makes the climate worse, not better.
The argument of the protesters is this. When you burn something, whether it be a fossil fuel or something else, such as wood, it sends smoke up into the atmosphere. Now, that smoke contains lots and lots of carbon. It also contains other pollutants that contribute to the huge pollution crisis we're suffering in Europe. It also contributes to the clearance of forests. Now, the EU does say that 50% of its woody biomass comes from waste products such as branches or from sawdust. But that's not the point, says Luke Chamberlain.
If you burn wood, that carbon was outside of the atmosphere and then it's inside the atmosphere once you burn it. So burning wood makes climate change worse.
So that's what the protesters say. But what do representatives of the biomass industry say? We've got one here in the red corner, Kjell Andersson of the Swedish Biomass Association. He is the Sustainability Policy Director, and he says there can be no doubt at all that biomass is renewable.
It's a fundamental difference between carbon that comes from fossil sources and carbon that comes from plants and trees, because these plants and trees, they have captured this carbon from the atmosphere in recent time, and we only harvest about the same amount of carbon as these trees in total in the forest sequester every year. So therefore it is renewable. There is a good balance.
Okay, so clearly we need some mediation, so I called up an expert, a professor who's been studying biomass. His name is Karl-Heinz Erb, he's from the BOKU in Vienna, and I asked him this simple question. Can we describe biomass as carbon neutral?
In theory, yes, but under certain circumstances. If we have a decent spatial and time scale. Over the time scale of hundreds of years, biomass is carbon neutral, yes, if we do not deplete stocks. But if we deplete stocks, it is not carbon neutral. And of course, if we use a forest, in comparison of not using the forest, we deplete the stocks. That's the thing, that's the story. Using forests is actually today more or less accepted that this is not a solution to the climate crisis.
The carbon cycle of replacing a burnt tree with a new tree that grows in its place takes a lot of time. And one thing that we don't have in the climate crisis is lots of time.
Due to this time dynamics, due to that we kind of make a carbon debt first and only later we suck up carbon from the atmosphere. It is actually a time selling device, if you wish, but we need time buying devices in order to give the industrial system, the innovation systems enough time to come up with the better energy systems.
That's why Karl-Heinz says just leave the trees where they are. They're doing a great job. They're fantastic carbon sinks. But in this case, let's give Kjell Andersson of the biomass industry the right of reply.
Problem is that they look at only one single tree or one harvest of trees in one area, but they don't look at the whole forest. If you look at the whole forest, there is a good balance. We have more carbon in the forests in Europe today than we have had for decades or maybe 100 years. So the trees in total in the forests, they store much more carbon every year than we use in the harvest.
And there's another issue here. Can we even afford to burn forests to create electricity? Forests have much more to offer than simply wood to burn. Forests help regulate our rainfall. Forests are a priceless carbon sink. Forests help stop soil erosion. Forests keep us cool. I'm running out of fingers. Forests are also a vital haven for biodiversity, and that's so important.
Well, it's difficult to say if it's the bigger, but it is a crisis which is at least as urgent as the climate crisis. And we should not trade the climate crisis versus the biodiversity crisis.
Trees are so valuable, says Karl-Heinz Erb of the BOKU, that we shouldn't just send them up in smoke. We should use them for something that will last for a long time, such as a house.
Biomass probably is a good resource for a sustainable society, but it is a scarce resource, which means we need to really take care about efficient uses. We have to prioritize uses, to choose the most efficient use in terms of carbon, as well as in terms of biodiversity.
There is just one elephant in the room, but it's a big elephant. We need to stop using fossil fuels quickly. At the moment, there isn't enough wind power or solar energy for our electricity needs, and there are problems with hydropower as well. Kjell Andersen says that we cannot achieve our European climate goals without biomass, and the activists who oppose it are either welcoming in an era of ever more nuclear power or delaying the end of the fossil fuel era.
Biomass makes up about 60% of all renewable energy in the European Union, and it will be an essential part of reaching the targets in the coming years. Without bioenergy, this is going to be virtually impossible.
That's nonsense, says Luke Chamberlain, the activist who opposes biomass. He says what we need to do in Europe is learn how to use electricity, how to use power in a much more efficient way.
Every euro spent on burning wood is €1 less spent on making our buildings more efficient and putting that into true low emissions technologies.
That's it for this week from FM4 Klima News Weekly. Thank you very much for joining in the discussion. We love to hear your opinion. We'll be back next week with a fresh new episode. Bye-bye.